Jiyan is one of the most complete DPS characters in the game, from his performance on the battlefield all the way to the 4 stars on his banner. He consolidates many roles across his team comps and does it all with one of the most simple, easy to digest kits in the game. He's a character that's incredibly easy to learn, but has a few tricks up his sleeve when it comes to optimizing his performance. With that, welcome to the re-release guide for Jiyan, whose banner should be live or very close to it. A lot has changed since his initial banner in version 1.0, and I'm here to break down whether or not he's worth the investment, be it your pulls or your wave plates. Depending on who you already have on your roster, his value has only grown as time has gone on. Jiyan, with his baseline kit, provides short bursts of massive damage and the most consistent grouping in the game. It all starts with his Resonance Liberation. This ability grants him a special basic attack that deals a tremendous amount of heavy attack damage spread across multiple instances and drags smaller enemies helplessly along its path. Enemies caught in the attack can't make any actions at all, rendering him basically invulnerable to those susceptible to his crowd control. This attack has a 3-input combo, with the third press dealing the most damage, and has a short duration of 10 seconds with a cooldown of only 16 and a slightly above average cost of 125 energy. This ability, in all honesty, is the only type of basic attack you should be using with Jiyan, as his baseline normal attacks have some of the lowest numbers in the game. He can enhance his Resonance Liberation by casting it with at least half of his Forte circuit, which generates off his intro skills and normal attacks. This allows the ability to be cast in the air and also nuke in a large AoE around the target. This should be the only way to use his Resonance Liberation. If you ever see the animation on the left, you're playing Jiyan incorrectly. Jiyan's Forte circuit can also be used in another way, enhancing his Resonance skill. This ability dashes through enemies and deals a decent amount of damage, but can be enhanced by consuming half of his Forte circuit to deal 20% additional damage. During his liberation, Jiyan's Resonance skill gains this damage bonus automatically without consuming any Forte stacks. Factoring in all of his abilities, Jiyan's optimal playstyle revolves around his Resonance Liberation. You'll rotate through your entire support and sub DPS's rotation to stack multiple outro buffs on him, and then use his intro skill to generate his Forte circuit, and then immediately cast his enhanced liberation, nuking the field and then following up with his enhanced basics and occasional casts of his Resonance skill until his liberation times out, before swapping back onto your support to start a new rotation. Jiyan's outro skill enhances its recipient's heavy attacks with up to 2 coordinated ones that deal a respectable amount of damage. Jiyan also comes with very simple but very powerful inherent skills. The first grants him a 10% attack buff after using his intro skill, while the second increases his critical damage by 12% whenever he damages an enemy with anything. So when playing his rotations properly, you should have constant uptime on both of these buffs. His Ascension stats, being a 5-star limited character, are best in class, with boosts to critical rate and attack. When building Jiyan, you'll want to prioritize his Resonance Liberation, then his Forte circuit, and then his Resonance skill. His normal attack in most endgame rotations is only used for its plunge multiplier, so you should prioritize his intro before his normals, but can keep both at low levels if you're looking to save resources without sacrificing too much performance. For his weapons, he's got some great options, but mostly from the gacha. For the 4 stars, the Battle Pass weapon Autumn Trace will be his best choice, granting a big bonus to critical rate while also granting him a large attack buff from its passive, which he stacks up across his rotation. For non-premium options, Waning Redshift will be your best bet, with its large base attack and Resonance Energy passive giving him relaxed energy regen requirements. Helios Cleaver is the only other reasonable 4-star option, but this weapon is pretty bad unless you have a lot of copies, but I do. When it comes to 5 stars, Jiyan's best weapon will naturally be a signature. This weapon at max stacks gives a huge 48% heavy attack bonus with 12% attribute damage on top, giving him the most overall damage boosts across his very heavy attack focused damage profile. Age of Harvest, Jinsei's signature, is another fantastic pick, as Jiyan can easily use 2 and up to 3 with S1 of his enhanced Resonance skills during his liberation to still make use of the weapon's Resonance skill buffing effect, while the universal attribute damage bonus makes it even more viable. Lustrous Razor, the standard 5-star, is a good stat stick, but has one of the most unsynergistic weapon effects for Jiyan in the game. While Jiyan can easily make use of the weapon's ER passive, he quite literally cannot deal Resonance Liberation damage. His Liberation and Enhanced Liberation entirely deal heavy attack, making this weapon a pure stat stick that can still still perform in endgame content. When it comes to his echoes, Jiyan realistically only has two options. As a main DPS, Sierra Gale, his attribute set, will be his best option for typical teams, as its bonus on intro skill synergizes fantastically with his team's rotations. There's only one arrow forecast, the Wind Gorilla, and its buff to heavy attack and arrow damage synergizes perfectly with his kit. This move can be swap cancelled after its first hit connects, allowing you to weave this ability into your sub DPS's rotation to streamline Jiyan's on-field rotation. For the smoothest rotations, you want to have 125 to 140% ER, but can make do with less if you feed Jiyan more intro skills across your rotation. Jiyan can also function on lingering tunes, but this set is mainly used for solo content and shouldn't be considered outside of it. When it comes to echo substats, you'll want as many crit rate, crit damage, energy regen, and attack subs as possible, with heavy attack and resonance skill damage bonuses as the cherry on top. Jiyan scales very well with crit and has a significant amount of innate bonuses across his skill tree and second inherent skill. His 3 costs should both be arrow damage %, but you can squeak by with an attack 3 cost if the substats on it are great. As you can see, my Jiyan is at a decent level of investment at S1 and equipped with Jinxi's signature Age of Harvest. I tested his performance across quite a few teams as a main DPS and a dual DPS as well, and the results were what you can expect for a limited 5-star. Very good. With his reliance on intro skills and fast team rotations, I'll be using Shorekeeper across a majority of his teams, as her reliance on intro skills to activate her team-wide buffs synergizes very well with his kit. The first team up is easily his strongest while also being the most accessible, and that's with Mortefi. With Mortefi on his initial 1.0 banner and his current one, pulling Jiyan means you'll likely pull Mortefi as well, with hopefully more copies than me. This team follows a traditional hypercarry rotation with an immediate use of Jiyan's resonance skill before building up Concerto on your other team members. You'll cycle through your outro skills, beginning with the support and then your sub DPS. To maximize Jiyan's efficiency on field, try to weave in his Wind Gorilla Echo skill during Mortefi's rotation just before Mortefi is at full Concerto. After swapping back to Mortefi, fill up his Concerto gauge and then use the Heron Echo skill before introing onto Jiyan and then following up with his enhanced Resonance Liberation. You can dodge cancel Jiyan's basic attack chain after the second to immediately begin another attack chain while his dragon is still dealing damage. This maximizes his DPS. His Resonance skill can also be used in a similar way, and even more with his S1. Mortefi has a tremendous amount of synergy with Jiyan due to his incredible buff to heavy attacks on outro, his liberation's repeated coordinated attacks, and if you have static mist, its built-in attack buffs. Shorekeeper is typically the best recipient for Jiyan's outro skill to both activate her enhanced intro and actually deal his outro's damage, as it only works with heavy attacks. You can spice up this team's rotations by giving Jiyan every intro skill, dramatically boosting his Forte Circuit generation. This lets you weave in some enhanced skills along with his Echo skill to increase the team's damage. This is one of the best teams in the game, and only gets better when Mortefi is at S6 for its massive attack buff to the entire team. Our next lineup features another 4-star DPS, but with a twist. It's Aalto. This team has an identical rotation to the Mortefi one, with the main difference being that Aalto generates Concerto a lot slower than Mortefi. On the flip side, he does deal a bit more damage while on field. The Wind Gate opened by Aalto's Liberation doesn't just buff range attacks, it buffs any attack that goes through it. This, when combined with Aalto's arrow buff on outro, Static Mist, and the Moonlit Suite's damage buff, can allow this team to do a lot of damage. This team sacrifices the rotation efficiency of Mortefi for more on-field damage from Aalto, but lacks the coordinated attacks that makes Mortefi's team pop. When Aalto is S6, he also grants a minor crit rate buff on his Liberation's Windgate, making the overall Shorekeeper Aalto combo grant up to 20.5% crit rate across Jiyan's Liberation. Overall, this team isn't bad, but it's not better than Mortefi. Our third lineup is with a limited sub DPS, Zhezhi. This team follows the same rotations as our prior two sub DPSs, but Zhezhi is a lot faster than both. There's nothing particularly crazy to note about this team other than the fact that it gets a lot stronger when Jiyan is at S1 or above. With Zhezhi's big boost to resonance skill damage, you want to use as many of these as possible during his resonance liberation. The clear time is competitive, but there are other teams and DPS characters that Zhezhi works with a lot better. But if you don't have Jinxi, or you don't feel like playing Jinxi, or the boss is Spectro resistant, this team actually feels very good to play. Our fourth lineup uses another 4-star sub DPS, Yangyang. This team has a much faster rotation than the prior 3 characters, as Yangyang generates some of the fastest concerto in the game. You will want to give Yangyang Shorekeeper's intro skill across these teams to activate Yangyang's forte as fast as possible. You lose the damage buffs from other sub DPS's outro skills, but gain much faster rotations in resonance energy. Since Jiyan casts his liberation immediately upon intro, this means he gains full benefit from all of Yangyang's energy regen. When combined with Yangyang's S6, this team isn't lacking in damage at all, and capitalizes on Jiyan's liberation's short effective cooldown of about 6 seconds. Jiyan can do a lot more rotations in this team in exchange for less damage on each rotation, and the clear times are very good. Our last team is probably one of the most fun to play, and it's a dual DPS comp with Zhang. For this team, I slotted in Verena instead of Shorekeeper due to her faster access to team-wide damage buffs. Jiyan is a little rough to play in dual DPS teams, as his liberation has a very short duration of 10 seconds. He doesn't have any downtime between his big bursts of damage as well, unlike Zhang Liao or Changli, making every swap during his liberation far less efficient than other characters. However, his fast animation times lets him weave in damage very well with other characters, but it does feel lacking in a lot of other ways. It's an interesting team, but at the end of the day, it isn't something I'd recommend for most players, especially considering the fact that Jiyan already works so well with so many 4-star characters with much simpler rotations. It'll still clear, depending on the boss, but these main DPS characters that you typically use in dual DPS comps like this can easily headline their own teams, making comps like this a poor use for your resources and energy in the tower. Now that we've taken a look at some of his teams, it's time to talk about Jiyan's overall value and power. Jiyan's main strength is his incredible damage combined with his incredible grouping, and he has a lot of built-in synergy with some of the most accessible characters on the roster. He is, in my opinion, one of the highest value characters in the game from a roster building perspective, as he uses a lot of characters that aren't best in slot in other teams, while also having some of the most flexibility in the game when it comes to Tower of Adversity runs. That's because there's only one boss resistant to arrow, making him widely usable across most sides. He also works well with both limited broadblades and synergizes fantastically with Shorekeeper, giving him a lot more value if you already own Jinsei Sig or have Shorekeeper on your account. This story doesn't change very much with his sequence nodes, at least his early ones. His first sequence node grants a charge to his resonance skill and decreases its enhanced cost to just 1/4 of his forte circuit. This grants him additional energy generation across his rotations and more uses of the ability across his liberation, but isn't a sizable DPS increase. His second doubles his forte generation on intro skill, basically granting him 100% while also giving him a massive 28% damage buff. This is a big bonus, but isn't very high value compared to other sequence nodes, specifically Shorekeeper's S2. His third node is where things get a bit more spicy, with massive buffs to crit rate and damage after basically using any ability in his kit outside of his basic attacks. His fourth node gives him minor supporting abilities, with a 25% heavy attack buff to the entire team upon casting his liberation, but it's mainly for himself. His fifth heavily buffs the damage on his outro skill's coordinated attacks, while also granting a stacking attack buff up to 45% that's immediately maxed out after using an intro skill. And his sixth node turns him into a walking tactical nuke, increasing the damage multiplier on his forte enhanced liberation by up to 240% if he builds up stacks through intro skills, resonance skills, or heavy attacks. It's expensive, but also very strong. At the end of the day, Jiyan is one of the easiest characters in the game, while also providing a lot of room for mastery to maximize his DPS. He's one of the only characters in the game without a dedicated 5-star sub DPS, but still performs amazingly in pretty much every type of content imaginable. His combination of grouping and short sustained damage make him one of the most ideal picks for both bosses and multi-wave AoE content, and he can do all of it on a relative budget. He's a fantastic character to have at S0, but admittedly doesn't scale very well with dupes until he has S3. But if you own him, you can easily clear with some of the most affordable teams in the game. Be on the lookout for more guides like this in the future. I'll be looking to upload more content on new releases as fast as possible with in-depth team overviews and strategies just like this. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.